As a game, Resident Evil 2 Remake is fantastic. It takes the core of what made the original Resident Evil titles prior to Resident Evil 4 on the survival horror front stand the test of time, has kept that core, and updated with modern sensibilities, design, and technology. And that's fantastic. That said, even as a remake for a game that came out 21 years ago, it doesn't make the original irrelevant, but more of a different interpretation of its source. It stands on different merits from the original version of Resident Evil 2 from 1998. Same case could be made for Final Fantasy VII Remake, which recently came out. Sadly, there are a few things in this remake that makes it fall just short of what made the 1998 version of it such a classic. We'll get to, but it got so close to getting it right. A lot has changed in 21 years between the 1998 original and the 2019 remake. The series has gone through many different iterations and changes, straying away from the core formula over time with mixed results, with some parts great, and then some, not so much.
Complete global saturation.
Capcom as a company has changed, the whole industry has changed in many ways for the worse. Heck, people who were born when the original was released are now old enough to buy alcohol in the States. While I'm on my mandated break for punching boulders, let's talk about the Resident Evil 2 remake. In the video I did on the Resident Evil remake, I talked about the gameplay flow that makes it so special and such a great game. Constantly thinking about when was the last time you saved, how many items you're going to take with you, where you're going, what weapons you should have with you, what healing items you should take with you, where's the nearest item box. As you're navigating your way through, you're going to be picking up new items throughout. That gets your mind thinking about areas you've come across in the past that you can now use. In ways you get into a flow that's similar to Metroidvanias, but somewhat different. With Metroidvanias, you get new abilities that clicks off your mind of, oh, here's areas I could go now. That's also the case here, where you get a new item that can open a door or unlock something new, and you have a lot of that in your head going, okay, where have I seen this and where can I make use of it? A lot of this works so well, of course, due to how interconnected this world is. So how does this formula get updated from the 1998 version? Due to gameplay changes, there are some tweaks to the formula. Without loading screens between doors, areas aren't exactly separate as they were before, where you could run out of a room and not have to worry about enemies. Now that doesn't mean exactly you're safe. Enemies will come through doors and chase you down as opposed to just staying in that room. Granted, there are various rooms where enemies will not come in, but this still changes up the formula in a way that gets you thinking a little bit differently than before. You'll end up in this flow state where you're constantly moving back and forth, thinking of where you need to go next, what you're going to be doing, what you're going to be taking with you. Doesn't matter how many times we play these kind of games, there's always still something that's oh so satisfying. One of the reasons that Resident Evil has been such a beloved franchise is this constant inventory management and exploration flow. Let's discuss the interconnectedness of Resident Evil 2. But there's enough changes to room layouts, various rooms, items that's not 100% repeat. You can't just sleepwalk your way through because you played the original so many times, which is nice. Like Resident Evil 1 or 7, that first area is always by far the best when it comes to being interconnected, and even with a few tweaks, I'd honestly love to just see a Resident Evil game that just sticks in one area the entire time and just goes all out with keeping things interconnected. One of the areas where I feel the remake improved on is the sewer section. The sewer section is much more interconnected with itself, and it also connects with the police station. It was one of those moments when you remembered where you are, it clicks in your head, and it's just, I always love these moments in games like that. The lab, while enjoyable, definitely is more of a linear route. Granted, this is the case with all Resident Evil games, so it's not like it's a shocker here. Again, I would really love to see them try a title, who knows, maybe with Resident Evil 8, where they just focus on one area and just go all out with keeping it interconnected. How about the gameplay changes? Now we could talk about the major change here being that no longer are we dealing with tank controls and fixed camera angles. Instead, we are now using the over-the-shoulder perspective. I think it's wishful thinking at this point to expect any AAA studio to do tank and fixed controls. Instead, you're going to have to look to the indies for that kind of stuff. That said, This setup works really well. Even though we now have the option of free aim, there's still something quite tricky about these enemies. The way they move, they sway, they slow down, they speed up and lunge at you, they'll keep you on your toes. It could be tricky at times to get those headshots off. Another interesting gameplay change that I feel adds a lot of depth is the use of defense items. Compared to Resident Evil Remake, where they were completely separate from your main inventory and can only be used when you're getting attacked by enemies, here, they can be used in both situations. Items like grenades or knives can be used normally as attack items, or they can be used as defense items when grabbed by an enemy. This little addition makes for some really interesting gameplay choices. Do you make use of a knife or grenade when grabbed to save your health? Or do you take the loss so you still have that grenade for later use? It's a really interesting little addition and tweak compared to Resident Evil 1 Remake that adds another layer of depth to this game. So when I fired up this game, I went right to hardcore mode. As a veteran in the series, I only want to save by making use of the typewriter and ink ribbons. And I have to say, this game isn't afraid to kick your ass. It's like a pissed off Tony Soprano.
Sorry I'm late, the alarm was...
If you're not careful with your ammo supply and healing supplies, you may find yourself needing to start over, which I actually found myself doing my first playthrough on the second William Birkin fight. Let's talk about the two scenarios. We have Claire's scenario and we have Leon's scenario. It's interesting that with just a few tweaks, there is a different flow between playing Claire and Leon, not just due to the weapons they have available, but the changes in items they receive and when they receive them. When we get to the parking lot, there's the different branch of what they need to do. In Leon's campaign, we get a brief period where we get to play as Ada Wong, as opposed to Claire's where we get to play as Sherry. I prefer Ada's scenario. It's kind of interesting to be able to use some Batman-like gadgets as her. I like the idea of Sherry's running away from this crazy madman that is Chief Irons, but the trial and error force stealth section is pretty annoying. As fun and enjoyable as both scenarios are, here's the main point where the game falters, especially in comparison to the original. It's the lack of choice and impact between the A scenario and the B scenario. In the original Resident Evil 2, various choices you made in your first playthrough had an impact on how your B scenario would play out. Don't get me wrong, both scenarios are still great and worth playing through and a lot of fun, but not having these choices impact the other removes a layer of depth to the game that the original had and replayability. That's such a disappointment. It kind of boggles my mind why this was not included in the game because everything else they got so right. It's not like Capcom didn't know that people loved this from the original game. I do understand that game development is much more costly and much more complex and much more of a large scale than it was 21 years ago. But it's such a shame that one of the absolute favorite features of the original game that added so much depth and replayability is missing here. It's interesting to look at the Steam achievements here in regards to what people completed. While not a 100% accurate number, from looking at Steam achievements, around 50% of players finished Leon's story, Claire at around 40%, and just over 30% for both. Now this whole thing about a lack of game completion could be a whole other video in of itself, and probably will be in the future, because you would be surprised if you look at the achievement stats of various games, just how many few people actually complete games. Perhaps maybe Capcom has looked at numbers like this and thought it wasn't worth it to do just for something that only a few players would do. We can all agree that this is a very disappointing feature that they did not include. Let's talk about the characters. As this is a long-running franchise that's had many people and writers over the years, numerous sequels, spin-offs, movies, canon, non-canon, it's easy for characters to be on the receiving end of the Flanderization effect. So it's nice here that Capcom can remove all that excess baggage and kind of go back to more what made the original characters so great. I have to say this is probably my favorite version of Claire. And while I do like Leon, I am still partial to Resident Evil 4 Leon as the best.
No thanks, bro.
Beyond the issue of the A and B scenarios I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest disappointments I have with this game are the lack of time between Claire and Leon, because when they are together, it's really great. I really enjoy that scene with them at the gate talking to one another. They just have this great connection, and maybe Leon's the one to help continue the Redfield bloodline.
I'm guessing you don't have a key in one of those fancy pockets?
Unfortunately, no. But how are you doing?
You know, just surviving.
That's good.
Of course, we have to talk about Mr. X. Even when he starts out wearing a fedora, He is very intimidating. I enjoy how much more he plays a part in this game as opposed to the original, and in a way reminds me of the Crimson Heads in Resident Evil 1 Remake. Just when you think you have the layout down and everything there, here's something new to show up that can mess around with you. Boy oh boy, did he sure love to mess around with me, especially in the library room when I'm trying to move those bookcases. Mr. X Footsteps reminds me of Metroid Fusion, and I haven't gone oh crap since then, just from hearing footsteps. All things considered, while he does pack a massive punch, he's not the speediest or quickest or most agile and fairly easy to dodge.
All I know is you never had the makings of a varsity athlete.
But he's still a great presence to the game. I could see why people got frustrated with him. I'd rather have him in the game than not. Granted, if he does really bug you, you can mod him out. Wrapping up, the remake of Resident Evil 2 is fantastic, even though it does miss the mark on just a few areas. It gets the core right. I do have to commend Capcom for making a game that takes a classic game formula and updates it with modern quality of life improvements, but didn't get into trend hopping and didn't try anything with open worlds or the ubification of games, didn't rely on quest markers or objective points telling you exactly where to go. It focused on what made the original so great, and I love it. Anyways, I think my mandated break is over. I have to go back to punching some boulders. If you did enjoy this video, leave some comments. I'd love to hear how you felt about the remake. Like, subscribe, you know the whole shebang. I do have some other Resident Evil videos, and I will be doing some more in the future, along with more survival horror games. Anyways, Boulder Punch out. Have a great day, you fine folks.